I'm excited to welcome Emir from Sim.ai, who is fresh off of a Series A led by Standard Capital. Emir, thanks for joining.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
It's great to be back.
Appreciate it. Why don't you maybe kick it off and tell us what is Sim.ai?
Yeah, so Sim is a platform to build AI agents. So it's sort of a Figma-like canvas with cursor-style side prompt where you could build workflows by dragging and dropping or typing in natural language to sort of build an agent to do anything, either inside of your product or to automate tasks for you in the background.
Awesome. And give us the current state of the business.
Yeah, so we just crossed 60,000 developers on our cloud platform, and we're one of the fastest growing open source workflow builders out there right now. So we just crossed 17.5K GitHub stars, which is pretty exciting. So I guess those are the main things we care about.
Yeah, that's amazing, especially because you guys were just in the spring batch not too long ago.
Yeah,
right?
It feels like yesterday. It kind of was.
Yeah, it kind of was like yesterday. That's awesome. Maybe take us back to the early days. How did you and your co-founder Waleed first meet?
Yeah, so we actually met in Berkeley. I was coming, it was my sophomore year, right before my sophomore year started, and it was COVID my freshman year. So I came to Berkeley and I knew nobody, and I was paired with my roommate at the time who I didn't know either, and his best friend from high school was Waleed. So we got to know each other like right before school started, and he was kind of my first friend at Berkeley, and then we've just been best friends ever since there. So we like spent all of our time together in undergrad, and then once we graduated last year, I knew I wanted to start a company with him, and he was a year older than me, so he was working actually down in LA at Amazon. And I literally called him and I was like, hey dude, move to SF with me and like let's start a company. And like on the phone call, he just quit his job and moved to SF.
How long had you guys known each other at that point?
For about like 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
But we had pretty much hung out every single day in that time span.
And had you built stuff before together? Or
No, not at all. Not even like as much as a project. We basically were just best friends, and he was like one of the smartest people I knew, like irrespective of that. And so we were just like, I know I want to do something with him, and so like just come to SF. And actually I kind of tricked him a little bit. At first I told him to just come to SF for a month. And I was like, just stay with me for a month and like we'll figure stuff out. And then he ended up just never going back home. And so things spun out from there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so did you guys have an idea in mind when you first decided to start working together? Or you're just like, this is just a person that I want to work with and we'll figure out the rest later?
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. So when he first came to SF, I pitched him on this idea, like pretty much the first day he landed.
This specific idea of Sim?
Not actually this specific idea, a previous idea. So the idea was it's kind of like a dynamic landing page where based on your like browsing history or if you have like data about someone in a CRM, you show up to a landing page. And right now, if you're on a landing page, like it speaks to the general audience, right? And then typically you try and optimize like the language or like the positioning of certain things on the page based on, you know, like the overall metrics. But I was like, what if we could customize a website just for one person? And then we ended up just trying to sell that to sales and marketing companies. But that was like kind of the worst idea just because we knew nothing about sales and marketing. We didn't understand their problems whatsoever. And so the first day he landed in San Francisco, I'm like, I have this idea for a company, like it's gonna be huge. And he was like, I'm in. And then he just quit his want to spend the next like 20 years of our life, you know, doing this. So we were just like, all right, let's figure out another idea.
And was that an idea that you guys had applied to YC in the past with?
Yeah, so that was actually the first time we applied to YC. And I remember that was like probably a reality check for us. I think it was sort of the end of November. I want to say it was like November 30th. And we got on an interview actually with Michael Seibel and Diana. And they asked us like, oh, so what do you guys do? And we were like, explain to them this whole platform. And basically we spent the whole 10 minutes trying to explain what the app did because it was so confusing. Yeah. And I think eventually after that call, we just realized like we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
And so we spent all of December basically trying to figure out what we should build. And I kept coming back to this idea of building agents because that last company we built, or the startup that we were working on, was called Scalemont. And when we were working on Scalemont, we basically had like hundreds of agents. Like imagine an agent that like did research on your background and then tried to create like a hero section, right? And so you have to create like all of the text for the hero section. Then you want to generate images, right? Because like typically a website has images. So then you have to go have a small LLM that generates a prompt for an image generator. Then that goes, pass it to the image generator. Then that image generator gets you the image. You put it back in your website. You create like all these case studies and footer sections and everything. So it was just such a complicated, over-engineered project. But we realized like actually the biggest problem of that project, or like the thing that we cared about the most, was building agents. And just between Waleed and I, it was hard for us to even understand, like, hey, did you already build an agent that did that thing? Like, that researched that person and got their history or like maybe their background. And so that was kind of the idea for SIM, where it's like, hey, why don't we have this platform where we can actually visually orchestrate these agentic workflows as opposed to just writing it in code? And so that was actually the birth of SIM.
So it came out of your own problem. Was there like a light bulb moment that like this is what we should build, or like how did you realize this would be the thing?
Sort of. It wasn't necessarily like one moment, but I remember we spent all of December of last year basically trying to find what we were going to build. And I remember we were looking into everything, basically like healthcare, logistics, all sorts of stuff. But I was like, I don't know anything about healthcare, nor do I know anything about logistics or any other industry. I basically only know things about LLMs and building agents. So I remember it was January 5th. And I was like, I'm a super big power user of Figma, and I love Jupyter Notebook. And I was like, I would just love if those products were just like one and the same. I don't know what that would look like, but like I kind of want to figure it out. And so it was January 5th, and I was like, and I want to build a platform, and I want it to be open source, and I want you to build agents in sort of this Figma environment. Waleed's like, that sounds really stupid. And I was like, yeah, you're right, but like let's just try it for 5 days and let's see what happens. He was like, all right, I'll let you do that while he does some research. So I spent 5 days working on it, and on January 10th, Waleed was like, all right, you're dumb enough to do this for 5 days. I'll join you on January 10th. Like, this is idiotic, and like, no one's gonna use this.
Yeah.
I was like, you're right, but it's something I care about. Honestly, if nothing else, I was gonna build agents on that platform just because we saw the pain from our previous project. Yeah. And what's funny was when we started, he was like, what's your goal with this? And I was like, if we get this to 100 GitHub stars, I'll be like super happy. He's like, 100's way too many. I was like, actually, you're right. So if it gets to 10, I'll be satisfied. And that was back in January. So it just, we wouldn't even have believed if you had told us that we were at like 500 stars now in January.
What was the moment after you decided to pivot to this where you were like, I think this is actually the thing that's going to stick?
I think once Waleed joined.
Okay.
I think
so he wasn't a believer, but you were convinced at that point.
I think I'm more optimistic, and I think Waleed's more of a skeptic. And so I think once Waleed gives me the go-ahead that we can like work on something, then I think that's like a sign that it's actually going to succeed. And so I think once he joined in January, I think from that point onwards, there wasn't a single day we looked back. We were just building from then until now.
Any advice that you would give to people going through that same, kind of pivot journey and hopefully help them find their way out sooner?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing for us while we were pivoting was we were trying to perhaps reach too far away from what we understood. Mm-hmm. I think as an engineer, we often underplay what we understand, just like about coding or just about the world. And if you're really, really critical about what you understand, perhaps better than others, then you should lean into that more. And so I think oftentimes, at least when we were pivoting, we were looking for all these far-fetched ideas, but what we should have done is just looked at what we had already built together and just try things, just ship ideas, and you can iterate like 15 times before landing on an idea. And I think that's one of the things about YC that I really loved, is just like that openness to pivoting.
Yep. Had you tried a bunch of the other like workflow agent builder tools out there and discovered that they weren't right for you? Or talk about your experience there and how you look to differentiate the product that you're building with SIM.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when we started, I had tried a couple of other workflow tools, but it sort of felt to me like the traditional workflow automation that had existed for basically decades, actually. Workflow software is not new. It's been around for, decades. And so when I tried them, I felt that they were not AI native in the way that I wanted them to be. For instance, if I want to orchestrate one agent to do the same thing 100 times over and then make like some synthesized response for me, or if I want to even build a workflow with natural language, some of these things that I felt like were already accessible in programming were not accessible on workflow platforms. And so I figured that workflows are kind of the next paradigm for programming, where we're kind of moving up the abstraction stack. You can see this with Cursor, where most of code today is just generated by an LLM. And I think in the future that actually most software will be orchestrated inside of workflows rather than just in pure code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a common trend that we've seen, where everything just keeps becoming more and more abstracted, and you get further away from the pixels or the actual source code. And it seems like you guys are really leading that trend for a lot of people.
Totally. I mean, if you were going back to like the 50s or the 60s and you told people they wouldn't be programming with punch cards, they'd be like, what does programming even look like, right? And so obviously, like the modality in which we've programmed has changed a lot over the course of history. And I feel like this paradigm is the next step. And I feel like we're always going towards the path of least resistance. And if we can truly be the easiest way to ship some software, or some agent, then why wouldn't we be the next paradigm?
Yeah. You would have been really happy getting to 100 GitHub stars. You're at like 17,000, more than that right now.
Yeah.
Not that much later, you know. So you've really been able to figure that out, and like your open source traction has really been blowing up. How'd you pull that off, especially for any other founders out there building open source products and that maybe are in your shoes early on where like they'd love to just get to 100? What advice would you have for them right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say two things. The first thing is that we found a space where, first of all, the other platforms are not fully open source. And we really actually we believed in the ethos of being open source, which is that, you know, we think that in the future, basically LLMs are going to just be able to one-shot some code base. Like imagine if you had AGI and you gave it some task, it could probably go and replicate an entire application within minutes. So code is no longer the proprietary part of a company anymore, as it used to be. We also wanted to kind of like give this software away to the world because we figured that the platform is much more valuable once it's interconnected and kind of having this network of people on it, as opposed to the workflows running themselves. But we should not sort of constrain the workflows away from the open source community in the sense that we want people to build on top of SIM. We kind of want it to be like the foundational workflow platform, and then everyone can customize it to their own needs. Like for instance, if you're bringing it into healthcare or into logistics, then you can just like take out pieces of SIM and put your own layers on top of it. And we're kind of this like underlying engine. So that was kind of like, we wanted to just stick to the open source philosophy, and I feel like that actually bodes well with the community because I feel that developers are honest and they can kind of see through BS a little bit. And so if you're just truly open source and you actually are just Apache 2.0 or MIT license and you give your code away for free, I think people will be responsive to that. And then the second thing is like actually just finding developers where they are. So we posted a lot on Hacker News. We went to like Twitter and LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn less important, but you know, Twitter and Hacker News, and we kind of just put our project out into the world. And the response was obviously great, as you can tell. So we're kind of continuing in that direction.
And how are you guys, you hit #1 on GitHub trending, and that seemed to really boost a lot of your stars and adoption. Were there any strategies that you used to make that happen, or was that just kind of luck that a lot of people got into it at the same time?
Yeah, it's really interesting. This kind of trending concept is something that we've been really focused on in the course of SIM. And what we've realized is the majority of our stars come while you're on GitHub trending. And to be completely frank, we weren't even really sure what was GitHub trending before we had started our project. Mm-hmm. And then I realized later that GitHub trending is super important. Because when you're featured on GitHub trending, typically you'll get anywhere between like, 250 to like thousands of stars in a single day. Our kind of drive and our launch schedules are always like around how we can optimize for GitHub trending. Mm-hmm. And so how we basically got on there is just to organize like some orchestrated launch, like to let a big community of like developers know about your product all at the same time. So if we go out on Hacker News and on Product Hunt and on Twitter, kind of all at the same time, and you coordinate these launches, then you can start to develop some traction around your GitHub repo.
How have you been able to convert some of this open source interest into like actual paying customers?
Well, we have a cloud platform. So sim.ai is our cloud platform, and it's linked in our GitHub repo. And so if you actually map charts of our GitHub stars to the new users on the platform, it kind of follows the same pattern. There are obviously some external factors that'll make the cloud platform grow much faster. Like for instance, if some workflow or AI influencer finds out about SIM and they make a video about it, that's kind of a channel that typically goes to the cloud platform as opposed to the open source repo. But originally, pretty much all of our new users trended in the same exact way with our GitHub stars. And so we could basically map like a one-to-one plot with our GitHub stars and our cloud users. And then once they come to our cloud platform, then it's sort of just easier to get set up on SIM to build an agent as opposed to running it locally. Of course, you still have that option, but for people that want a little more convenience, they'll just come onto the cloud platform and then pay for inference on there.
Cool. And any kind of general advice for open source founders?
The first thing I think is to be like truly open source. I feel like people are worried that their code is proprietary or that someone's going to steal their idea, but no one can steal your vision. And so you can put all your code out there, and we know that there are competitors that are looking at our platform and definitely want to take ideas from there. But we're not scared whatsoever, just because we have our own vision for what we want the product to look like. And it's going to change the platform drastically in 3 months from now or 6 months from now than it is today. So I'm not necessarily concerned if someone takes the product right now, because ultimately we believe in the vision of the company and no one can take that away from your repo. So the thing that I would advise founders that are building open source products the most is to be, one, truly open source, and to two, engage with your community. We do a lot on like Discord and on Hacker News and on Twitter. And so kind of like constantly talking to your users and like the dev community and understanding what they like and what they don't like about your project can also help you kind of like learn how to build a better product, but also build this community of developers around your repo.
You've grown incredibly quickly and had a lot of success since the batch, which was, I don't know, 7 months ago or something like that probably. Yeah. What's been the hardest part of the journey for you that you feel like you've had to overcome so far?
I think probably the hardest part is just forcing ourselves to be better every single day, to never be satisfied. And so, for instance, like our whole team will have a discussion about like the border radius of a button for like 3 hours until someone just like gives up on the argument. But I think that actually the hardest thing is just like challenging or like being content with certain things and just like moving forward as quickly as possible. I think that when you're in YC, you're kind of in this mode of like launching all the time. And when we got out of YC, we were extremely deliberate about consistently launching, outside of the batch. And we actually grew much faster outside of YC than we did inside of YC. And I think it's because we kind of treated the batch just like as a small stepping stone on where our company future will be. So we kind of took those philosophies from YC of like launching like very often, being very public, like building momentum, and we kind of took that after the batch. And so I think that's how we were able to grow so fast. I mean, I think when we ended the batch, we were like around 5,000 developers on the platform. And then now just like 4 months later, we're at like 50,000 or 60,000. So I think it's just about like constantly launching and like constantly forcing yourself to just like be better and improve the platform every day.
Yeah, are there any tactical things that you do to like maintain that sense of urgency? Hours in 2 weeks, we got to hit our goal. What are some of the things that you do post-batch to be able to keep that sense of urgency, and it sounds like even ramp it up?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we have a launch calendar, and so I think that thing is something that we stay very true to, where every 2 weeks we launch something. And there's a really good quote that I love and Waleed loves. It was from one of the creators of Saturday Night Live, and they said, we don't go live because it's ready, we go live because it's Saturday night. It's 10:30 p.m. on Saturday night. And so that's kind of our philosophy as well. It's like engineers, I think, typically wait to release product until they think it's perfect. And that's just kind of never really works. And I'm sure you've had experience with this at your startup as well. And for us, like we're just consistently launching. So every 2 weeks, we put something out there. It doesn't matter if it's almost nothing. It's just that whatever we have ready. So it kind of forces everyone. It's a forcing function to get everyone around like some product release.
Yeah. That's great. It's an important muscle to build, and it's important that it's in the culture, because culture drives a lot of these decisions. Along those lines, I know you guys are hiring. What does the ideal person that comes to work at SIM actually look like?
The ideal person that comes to work at SIM is someone who's just extremely excited about the future of AI. Something that I fundamentally believe is that a lot of people talk about AGI is coming next year, maybe it's here right now. It actually doesn't matter if AGI comes or not. And my opinion on that is we actually have solved all the scientific problems that we've needed to completely revolutionize the world. I think what's actually left is an engineering challenge, not a scientific one. And so I think actually being able to democratize the way that developers build agents, or actually anyone can build agents, not just developers, is extremely powerful. And so I think if you gave a platform like SIM into the hands of, people who have aspired to build agents for their own personal use cases or inside of their company, then they could completely transform their own business and perhaps like their lives with agents. And so I think for someone who is interested in the future of AI and kind of what AI holds, from all like the latest model developments to like new tools and new stacks, someone who's just curious about the future of AI and would like to actually implement that in some kind of product where we can actually change the way that people build on top of AI, I think this is a perfect candidate for SIM. And so I think someone generally that's just intelligent, they don't even have to be like a TypeScript developer or I remember like one of our founding engineers, when he first came, we were talking to him about like all these features we're gonna build, and he was like, yeah, openly, like I literally don't know TypeScript, I know Go. And we're like, sure, just write it in Go. And so it's just like, it doesn't necessarily matter about your capabilities, it just matters about your drive and how curious you are about the future.
Cool. Yeah, I heard curiosity, people building on the cutting edge, interest in AI, and obviously ship, right? Like I'm sure that's a requirement for you if every 2 weeks you're shipping, whether it's ready or not.
Yeah, and I think also things that we're launching, and it's because we care so much. And I think the one thing that you can't replace in someone is just their passion and their love for building something. And so I think if you don't have that, you can't have anything. So we're just really looking for passionate people who really just want to drive the future of AI and this vision that we have.
Yeah, cool. How have you changed as a founder since starting this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've changed in a lot of ways. I'm certain that Waleed has changed in a lot of ways. And I think the main way that I've probably changed is realizing that it takes 10 years to build something great. And so, when you're first getting started, you might think that things are going to take a shorter amount of time than they are. And I think Brian Chesky always brings up that quote, which is like, people overestimate what they can do in a week and like underestimate what they can do in 10 years, or if it's like a quarter or 10 years or something like that.
Yep.
But I like fundamentally believe in that. And so I think that what we like really aspire to do is just show up every single day. So we come into the office at 9 a.m. We typically leave around like 10 p.m. and we do that 7 days a week or 6 days a week. Having that, I think if you do that every single day, it just compounds your growth over a long period of time. So it's also about having balance. I think a lot of people, especially in YC, when you're in the batch, you're like constantly shipping. It's really important to have balance. Like find time to go to the gym, find time to eat healthy, cook the food you're gonna typically eat, and to keep like a healthy lifestyle. You have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself as much as you are the company. And so I think that like my mentality had to mature a little bit to be like just a good founder, as opposed to when it was just Waleed and I in my apartment and just like sleeping on the couch and eating whatever and never going to the gym. So I think if we want to operate for the next 10 or 15 years, we have to keep this consistent and healthy lifestyle.
Any advice for founders that are watching this and hoping to follow in your footsteps?
Again, as I said, just staying true to yourself. So Waleed and I, we always were just like, being honest with ourselves, being honest with each other, being healthy, and just like listening to our own like minds and bodies and pushing things, of course, in the way that we both wanted. But kind of the important thing for both of us is just to like be very honest about what we understand, especially what we don't understand, and just to keep learning. And I think one actually big thing that I would say is that oftentimes in the past I struggled with optimizing for like short-term growth or short-term learnings. Whereas we should you're kind of in a balance of optimizing between like long-term learnings and like long-term growth. And so I think if you think of things in the timeline of like 10 or 20 years, you would much rather optimize for being like constantly learning for the next 9.5 years, as opposed to spending the next half year doing something that perhaps like, you're not interested in or you wouldn't be doing. So for instance, like the sales and marketing company that we tried to start, we were kind of too short-sighted in the sense of like, could we see ourselves doing this in like the worst moment of our lives in like 6 years' time? And if the answer is no, then you'll probably fail at that 6-year mark. Mm-hmm. And the thing that Waleed and I realized when we started this company is like, we could be doing this for 5 or 10 or 15 years with completely no success, and we would just be having so much fun doing it that we would keep doing it. And I think it's even important not to lose sight of that. For instance, I spent a lot of time selling and not programming in the past couple of months. And I realized that the thing I love most is programming, and that's also the thing that I'm best at. So I got back to programming, and I think we're always trying to optimize for putting ourselves in a position where we're like learning for the long term and like trying to succeed for ourselves in the long term.
Well, Emir, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
Really
it's great to
appreciate
hear
it.
your story.
Thanks.